All right, so today we are in Darkness and Light, part 13. Okay, part 13. And we are continuing here through the Brit Hadashah on this nice long journey that we've had through this study. And of course, since we've been in the Brit Hadashah, we've mostly been focusing on the understanding of darkness and light as connected to authority. Okay, in the Tanakh, we were mostly focusing on it being a natural state at the beginning and a place where something is birthed out of, a place devoid of actively useful light, that's darkness, light being deliverance, refuge, safety, and all that kind of stuff, illumination to our path. But really, we've been focusing a lot on the idea of it being submission to authority. Okay, that's the main focus that we've had, is the submission to authority. So when you're in darkness, you're not under authority, or you're under wrong authority. When you're in light, you are under Elohim's authority. You are submitted to. Key word being submitted to, not just like physically standing under it, but you're submitted to it. Okay? And so now we're going to be in 1 Peter. Okay? And so as we went through Thessalonians and now into Peter, we're going to be talking about how your behavior exemplifies which one you're in. We did that a little bit in Thessalonians, that you should walk as children of light, you should be doing things as sons of light, that kind of thing. What you're doing, your actions exemplify which condition you're in. Are you in darkness or are you in light? So we'll look in 1 Peter chapter 2. Okay, and then we're also going to then eventually go back to chapter 1. But let's start in chapter 2. Okay? Actually, we'll start in chapter 1, verse 1, just so that we're clear who is being talked to. Okay? Now he says, this is Kepha who's doing the speaking, an emissary of Yeshua Messiah to the chosen. Strangers of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, chosen according to the foreknowledge of Elohim the Father, set apart by the Spirit unto obedience. Okay, so he is speaking to those that should understand and know what's going on. Now, that doesn't mean they don't need to have certain things reminded to them or stirred up or sparked, but he's not speaking to totally clueless Gentiles. All right, he's speaking to those who are chosen, those according to the foreknowledge, who were set apart by the Ruach unto obedience. Wow, I'm surprised that actually got through most Christian Bibles. People were called unto obedience. It's funny, but you can't obey something unless there's actually something like to obey. There has to be some sort of instruction, guidance, law, something that you need to obey. All right? So that's our setting up the context there. And so now let's get to chapter 2. Now, we'll understand the context more when we go to chapter 1 again, but I want us to just kind of go through this in chapter 2. He says, having put aside then all evil. So based on everything he already said, he said, because of that, you should have put aside then all evil and all deceit, hypocrisies, envyings, and all evil words. So remember, evil is defined in Scripture as that which is not in line with what it was designed by the Creator to be. In other words, Yahweh created things to be a certain way, and you've now perverted it, twisted it, bent it, done something completely different or whatever than it was meant to be used for, done with, or performed like. Okay? So he's talking about all evil, all deceit, hypocrisies, envyings, and even evil words. Your words are meant to be used a certain way. So you could even have evil words. Evil words aren't like what society just calls, profanity. It just means words that are being used in a wrong way. Okay, he means your words to, as we read in Thessalonians towards the end there of chapter 5, to lift up and focus on encouraging one another, lifting up one another, praising your Elohim. This is what words should be used for. Now, they are used correctly and respectfully, sometimes in correction or in admonishment, but there's a proper use of words by your position, your relationship with the people you're with, and there's an evil use of words, meaning not that it's got to be overtly awful things that are happening, but you're just using them for things that he never intended them to be used for. Does that make sense? Okay, so we're trying to make sure we understand evil here. Now, you have to understand that he's talking to people that are set apart by the Spirit unto obedience, people that are kind of walking this along to a certain degree. And these are people that should have put aside all these things and starting from scratch. In other words, this is your life before. How do I know? Because he says, verse 2, as newborn babes. So for those of you that are wondering about, well, should I still do this or should I still do that, or I don't know what to, he says, newborn babe. What do newborn babes have? Nothing. They own nothing. They have nothing. They don't have toys. You can provide them with them, but as a newborn babe, they can't even play with them, right? They have nothing. You provide them and do everything for them. Who provides all that? The one in their vertical, their mother, their father, right? Or their children, their siblings. But there's those that love them, that have a role to provide for them, and they trust that completely because they have no choice. They're not conscious of anything else. They have no reason to doubt, have trust issues, fear issues, problem issues, but they're newborn babes. They naturally assume everything is going to be great. There's no reason for them to think. Actually, there's no reason for them to think. Just, So you're supposed to put aside then all of your stuff. And as a newborn babe, desire the unadulterated milk of the word in order that you grow by it. So now by saying unadulterated milk of the word, he's saying most specifically the things here that have to do with your walk. You're not going to give up your house and your things and all that other stuff. He's not saying that, like a newborn babe who literally has nothing. But specifically here, you're a newborn babe at this, at the halakha, at the relational vertical stuff and the relational horizontal stuff. Most of you probably would, if I had hands go up, would readily admit that you really did not understand fully, correctly, or even maybe at all, how to do either of those two things when you came into this. Or you came to realize little by little how much you didn't understand how to have a proper relationship with each other or a proper relationship with him. But if you come to this still holding on to some of the thoughts that you had about how that should be done, you're making a mistake. You need to lay it all down. Now, some of what you did absolutely was fine, but you have to put it down first and come and seek the unadulterated milk of the word, and that you could then grow by it and recognize, okay, there was a few things that I can still go and pick back up. I got to let it all go first. See, it's a lot easier. I have this pen in my hand, right? For those who are listening and aren't watching, but if this pen is my pen and let it be representative of this stuff, it's a lot easier for me to put it down first and then go and evaluate whether it's appropriate for me to have it back up than for me to have it in my hand deciding whether or not I need to let it go. Because if I'm deciding if I want to let it go, I've got an emotional part that I might not be able to completely disconnect from the rational, logical, appropriate thinking because it's in my hand. It's mine still. If it's mine, then there's an emotional connection. It's mine. It's what I do. It's how I've thought. It's how I've behaved. It's mine. But if I put it down, it's no longer mine. I've let it go. Now I could decide if it's something that I would like to be a part of being mine. I could pick it back up. But I have to first completely release it as not being mine anymore. I don't need that. I don't know what it is. I've just put everything down first. Okay? He says that you need to desire the unadulterated. What does that mean? It means that you've been dealing probably with adulterated milk. So you don't always look at what it says, but what it's also saying that it's not saying. If it's saying you should seek unadulterated, that means that there's also the adulterated. And you have now a verse telling you to put aside. So you're putting aside things so you can figure out if you have had anything that was adulterated in what you were thinking, doing, understanding in your walk, in your relationship. When I say walk, I'm not just talking about the mechanics of Torah. I mean the relational part that the mechanics lead to. The two great commands, your relationship with each other, your relationship with him. Okay? Now, and for those of you watching that think I'm doing Illuminati hand signals, I didn't practice this week, so if I do them wrong, don't get mad at me. Okay. You laugh. We get people who write comments all the time saying that I did some dumb thing with my hands. Okay? So, anyway. Isn't it sad that I have to actually think about these things and worry about them because this is what the distraction. You talk about squirrel, squirrel, squirrel. They're like, well, can you just listen to what I'm saying and stop being distracted by what my hands are doing? I'm Jewish. What do you expect from me? We use our hands a lot. Okay. But you're supposed to be as a newborn, so that means you have nothing. You desire the unadulterated, which means that you have to be hopefully putting down the adulterated part of the word in order that you grow. So what he's saying is the adulterated part of the word isn't going to help you grow correctly. Now you're going to grow, but you're not going to grow necessarily into Messiah. You're going to grow into whatever that milk and the source of that milk is going to have you grow into. Okay? He says, if indeed you have tasted that the master is good. So, if you have tasted that the master is good, I'm assuming, and I don't think I'd be in any trouble doing so, that all of you are here because you have at some point tasted that the master is good. But if you've tasted that the master is good, then you should be willing to act like a newborn and put everything down and then seek the unadulterated milk. Problem is, there's an awful lot of people that are teachers of the school of adulterated milk. Now, of course, here's the challenge. Probably 0 of them think they're teaching adulterated milk. So your job is really cut out for you. They all think they're teaching unadulterated milk. I certainly do. I think every teacher does. So, but you have to do the discerning. You have to seek through the Father and the Son and the Ruach to help you understand, what's what. But you have to first decide that you want unadulterated, which means that you have to first know that not only is the speaker likely having a chance or a possibility of teaching an adulterated version, but you can have a problem because of your emotional stuff of desiring an adulterated version, wanting to resonate with or connect with something that actually is adulterated because your filters are still not seeing clearly what's going on because you're filtering it through that emotional, the stuff that you're supposed to have let go and put aside. See, if you put it aside, it can't filter what you're looking at. It can't filter what you're hearing. It can't filter what you're experiencing. But you got to be able to put it aside because there's lots of adulterated milk out there. But you got to be seeking and desiring the unadulterated. So think of adulterated as unfiltered, unemotional, no agenda, all of that stuff. You have to find, and everybody pretty much that's ever spoken has some sort of agenda. I have an agenda, okay? But my agenda, and all teachers think their agenda is to do what he wants. But if they're coming from a denominational place, then their agenda is to have you see it through that denominational place. So that's why you go to Baptist, Pentecostal, Catholic, whatever, seminary, Jewish, because you come out so that you have that agenda, which is to help people be that. And that's why we hopefully can get past all that to get a point where we just want you to be him without the particular filtering flavor, of the seminary that we went to. Hey, you laugh, but a seminary is a place where independent and objective thought goes to die. Because you can't be there and have independent objective thought. They won't allow it. That's no joke. That's not to be funny. That's literally the truth. Okay? You cannot be in those places and not get yourself in trouble if you're going to have independent, objective thought. Because then that will cause you to ask questions that they don't want you asking. Oh no, we don't ask those questions. What's wrong with you? This is what we teach. That's what you teach. That's it. Okay? And that doesn't provide an unadulterated milk of the word. Okay? So, if you have, I know I'm beating this to death to some degree, but this is important. If you have indeed tasted of the master that he is good, then you have to put all this stuff aside. You need to prayerfully consider, I don't mean just in your prayer, but prayerfully consider when you're dealing with just yourself and ask the question, am I still filtering things through me? Okay? I was watching a video the other day. The guy was talking about marriage. He was very funny and everything. I thought it was, because I'm trying to make sure when I counsel, I got a lot of marriage things that I counsel, right? And one of the things he said that I thought was great at the end of one of the teachings was, if you read the Bible, one thing you can figure out for sure is that God is trying to kill you. But he is. He wants to kill you. not your body, not like have you not be alive. He wants the you that's supposed to be buried, the old man, the stuff that's supposed to, he wants that to die. But you don't want that to die because that part of you doesn't want to die. It's fighting for control. That's the self-sovereign stuff. But you have to, here he's saying, basically what did he say? He's talking about literally here, you dying and then being reborn as a newborn babe. But you have to die. You know? They stab it with their steely knives, but they just can't, never mind. But that's what you're doing. You're stabbing and doing stuff, but you can't kill it because you really don't want it to die. Yes, I just sang something from Hotel California. Okay. I do that because it just makes Manny's day. Okay, so I got to get the obligatory song reference in there somewhere. But that's part of the problem is you're like that ridiculous movie zombie something. It won't die, okay? But that part of you has got to be buried, okay? And when you get resurrected, that part doesn't come back with you. That's permanent. You need to kill that, let it die, get rid of it, lay it aside. I don't care what metaphor works for you. Okay? But you know, when I use that little song reference, understand the reason why it won't, you just can't kill that beast in you is because it doesn't want to die and you really don't want to die. You still have an emotional attachment to that part of you. Remember when I did the whole you sicko thing? I did that because you sin because it's what you really do want to do. You still do it because you have some weird part of you, and I'm talking about me and everybody has the same perverse weird part of us that really does want to do whatever it is that we're doing that we know is wrong. And then you get frustrated. Why do I keep doing that and I don't know, Rabbi? Because you still want to. Just accept that. But if you could kill that part, bury it, be done with it, you won't want to. And then you won't do it. And then you can come as a newborn babe. But it's that me, I, ego, whatever it is that makes us, I don't know the proper thing in psychology between the id and the ego and this, whatever, that part of you that wants, desires, craves. You're ultimately, in most cases, going to end up going and working in a direction to feed that craving. How do you fix the problem? Get rid of the craving. Because as long as you crave it and desire it, you're going to eventually get it. You're going to go do it. You're going to go receive it. You're going to go find it. And because you have this craving for this, whatever it is. And he's saying, look, if you've tasted of the master, you're going to have to come to this like a newborn babe. Newborn babe doesn't know what any of that stuff in life is about. It's a blank page ready to be written on. Okay? I mean, but, and it doesn't take much exposure to light the fire of desire. I saw a great little clip on the news the other day. Sometimes they play these little funny clips. It was a baby at a ice cream shop eating its first ice cream. And so the dad had the cone, and the baby was like, okay, and took a little lick. The eyes went whoop, and the kid grabbed it and shoved its face right in there. You saw that? The expression on the kids, this is a little 1-year-old, all right? First ice cream, didn't know what it was cold and everything, but as soon as that sugar hit, woo! 2 hands right into the cone. I mean, talking about the ice cream cone was like as big as his face. It was a big, and right in the face. A desire had been born. A craving had been born. But until that moment, that kid had no idea, which is part of why we should help protect our children and ourselves from being exposed to certain things that we don't understand can spark cravings and desires that are not good for us. Because, boy, that kid's eyes lit up like, oh, whatever that is, I want more, I want it now. Grab both hands, right into the ice cream. Fingers deep into it, like, give me that. It was great. like saucers. The eyes just went, oh, okay, whoa. But you have those experiences in your life, and they're not necessarily for things that are good. And then you just want it, and you want it, and you want it. But we got to be like newborn babes. Okay, so then he says, look, verse 4. If indeed you have tasted, if you've laid these things aside, then you need to draw near to him, a living stone, rejected indeed by men, but chosen by Elohim and precious. So as a newborn babe, now you draw near to him and let him write on your heart. Let him write in your mind. Let him write these things. Take what he has taught you from Genesis to Revelation and embrace those things as a newborn babe. You do that by drawing near to him. Now, you're not going to draw near to him behaving in ways that are offensive to him. Okay? He says, you also as living stones are being built up, a spiritual house, a set-apart priesthood, to offer up spiritual slaughter offerings acceptable to Elohim through Yeshua Messiah. Okay. I guess I have to make an important point here. There are lots of verses, especially in the Brit, in the New Testament, okay, that out of context sound like something has already been accomplished or happened. He starts off by saying, chosen according to the foreknowledge, set apart by the Spirit unto obedience. That's chapter 1. Then he says, hold on a second. You need to put aside then all these things and come as a newborn babe, if you've indeed tasted, and then draw near to him. Oh, but wait a minute. Then he tells you, as if it's completed, that you're a spiritual house and you're a set-apart priesthood. And that can confuse you in your mind and in your emotions, because you could easily ignore all of the previous admonitions about how this process works and just said, hey, I'm a set-apart priesthood. No. This is what you're supposed to become. This is his desire for you. And it's something you learn how to do in the unadulterated milk of the word. It teaches you how to become all that. And being set apart by the Ruach unto obedience, well, but if you're not obedient, then it kind of nullifies a bunch of stuff here. So there's a lot of the if and then. If you are set apart by the Spirit unto obedience and actually do something with that, according to the obedience and according to what the set apart Spirit has led you to do, basically that you were chosen to do, if you can lay aside all these things, if you can approach these things as a newborn babe, if you would then desire the unadulterated milk and that you would grow by it because you have tasted of the good that the Master is and you draw near to him, then you could be what you were designed to be, a house that is a spiritual house that's built up, a set-apart priesthood, to offer up spiritual slaughter offerings acceptable to Elohim through Yeshua. See, if you just read verse 5, which churches do, I'm sure, all the time, you think you're a set-apart priesthood who's offering up spiritual things. Not if you haven't done all the previous steps. It's kind of like saying, okay, I got the flour, I got the eggs, I got the stuff. I'm going to just put it all in a big bowl, put it in the oven, and I got a cake. No. And by the way, there are some ingredients that I put in there also just because, I didn't pay enough attention to what ingredients needed to be in there. It doesn't work that way. You have to still take them, deal with them in a proper order, in a sequence, and by certain portions, and make a cake. Or to make anything, whatever you're making, right? If you're cooking something. There's a recipe. If you've cooked, especially more complicated things, that if you don't do the recipe right, it doesn't come out right. Okay? I learned that the first time when I was using a bread machine to make bread. If I didn't put the right amount of water or yeast or whatever it was, it would not either rise or it'd be too hard or whatever. I mean, there's a reason why there's instructions and there's a recipe. That doesn't mean that you can't then learn how to bring your own flavor to it at some point, as long as you're not undermining the idea of the recipe, okay? In other words, I could do so much to a cake that, guess what? It's no longer considered a cake. It may taste good, but it won't be a cake, okay? And so that's the whole point here. He's trying to make you a spiritual house, a set-apart priesthood. And there's lots of stuff you can do that are going to lead to not being those two things if you add and take away from the recipe. And the recipe is found in the unadulterated word. So don't get all confused, because everybody wants to add their own flavor and do their own thing. And, God knows my heart, blah, blah, blah. All right. He says in Jeremiah that can't be trusted. The heart cannot be trusted. He also says that he tries the kidneys. You know what that is? That's the same idiomatic phrase by saying he knows what's your gut. In other words, like when you say, I know it in my gut, that's like how that real feeling is, of that truth. It says my gut tells me something, you know that's like a truth. Well, guess what? He knows what your truth is, what you think and what you believe truth is. He tests your gut. That's what he says by trying the kidneys. It's the same idea. Okay? What's at your core? Believe it or not, we're still going to get to the word darkness and light eventually. Now, so all of this is so that you can offer what's acceptable to Elohim, verse 5, through the Torah, through the light, through the word, through Yeshua Messiah. See, if you don't understand that he's all of those things, then you won't understand that verse at all. So it's through all that Yeshua is. He says, I'm truth, I'm the light, I'm life, I'm the word, I'm the Torah, right? All these things, I'm the light, right? The light of the world. All these things, it's through all of that we offer up spiritual offerings to Elohim. That which is acceptable to Elohim. See, but here's your problem. Okay, you ready for your problem? You don't really fully, truly care about what he thinks is acceptable. Because you think he should think it's acceptable if you think it's acceptable. You really don't. Not fully. I'm not saying you don't at all. Don't misunderstand me. But you don't fully want to make sure that it's acceptable. By the way, that's what you do in all of your vertical relationships. You will do things without checking with the person that you're vertically under because you assume that what you're doing is acceptable without checking with them because you think it's okay. So obviously they would think it's okay. So why would I have to check? Well, they're the only one who can decide what's acceptable to them, not you. So we do this in all our relationships. Okay? So a child is told, clean your room. And then the mother comes in or the father comes in and looks at it and says, this is not acceptable. The child goes, what do you mean it's not acceptable? I think it's great. Yeah, but you don't get to decide that. I sent you to do something, and so I get to decide what the acceptable outcome looks like. Okay? Oh yeah, there's nothing on the floor anymore, but I opened up the drawers and found out that half the stuff you put was in the wrong place. You just shoved it all in there, and by the way, it wasn't folded at all. It was just crumpled up in a ball or whatever. You are the one who gets to decide, as the parent, what is acceptable. If you're at a job, your employer or your manager or supervisor gets to decide if what you're doing is acceptable. You may decide that, hey, it's good enough, it worked, it was fine. Well, it's not your decision. So on the biggest level, on the highest level, Elohim gets to decide what is acceptable. And that's why you're told that you are to figure out what is that right and pleasing, acceptable things in your Father's eyes, in our Creator's eyes. But you don't get to determine that. He does. So you've got to let him do that. He gets to define it. Because you are supposed to be set apart by the Spirit unto obedience. You are supposed to be a house, a spiritual house, as living stones, in the same format as Yeshua being the living stone. We become like him, living stones, and we are spiritual homes, set apart priesthoods, offering up spiritual slaughterings acceptable to our Elohim. And we do this all through Yeshua. Not through Yeshua like that every time we do anything we have to do it pray in his name or use his name or mention his name. No, we do it through truth, through light, through Torah, through all the things, through the word, through all the things that he is that we understand, through his word, through the things that he actually said. He tells us what that looks like. And through his apostles, he tells us what that looks like. I am the light of the world. I am the truth, the way, and the life. We said all those things. So we know what he is. So when we do things through him, we have to understand that what we're doing. Okay? Verse 6. Because it is contained in the scripture. So there's the sort of legal backing for this, the authoritative backing. It says, all these things I just said is because it is contained in the scripture. See, I lay in Zion a chief cornerstone, chosen, precious, and he who believes on him shall by no means be put to shame. Now, okay, so my child, and I'm not talking about my literal child, okay? As a parent, my child believes me to be his or her father. Okay? Believes on that. Is there anything that then restrains them from going out and bringing shame or embarrassing me? No. So what is going to affect the shame part? Believing what I say. Believing what I instruct. That action. Because he says here, the verse says, he who believes on him shall by no means be put to shame because of the choices of action. Remember, you were called onto and set apart by the Spirit onto obedience. If you're obedient, there can be no shame. If you're obedient, there can be no shame. When is there shame? When you're disobedient. When do your children act ashamed and embarrassed because you told them not to do something, they did it anyway, and it blew up in their face, and now they don't know what to do and they don't know what to say because they're ashamed, and their head hangs down a little bit and they're staring at the floor. But if they did what you said, if they followed instruction, even if it didn't work, there's no shame because they did their part the way you said. And they can come up to you and say, Mom, Dad, whatever, even a boss at a job, hey, I did what you said, and somehow it went bad. Okay, now you're not blaming the person above. You're simply saying, I tried to implement what you said, and there's no shame in saying, I did it the best that I can, and something went wrong somewhere. Maybe I messed it up, or maybe I missed a step, but there's no shame in that. Now, when you actively choose, though, to ignore a step or part of the instructions, and then it goes bad, you know deep down that you messed it up. That you cut corners or took a shortcut or did something because you just felt like you were smarter than whoever it was. And then it goes bad. Tell me how wonderful you feel when you know that you have, absolutely owned that you purposely thought you were smarter than whoever was instructing you and you went and did your way and it blew up in your face. Tell me how good you felt. Now you're totally embarrassed. You're totally ashamed, and you don't even want to face the person because you know you usurped that authority, you did what you wanted to do, and it blew up. And now you're embarrassed because there's shame now. If you follow the instruction, you feel bad if it blows up, but you don't have the shame or the guilt. You just say, I don't know what happened. I tried to do what you said, and something went wrong. You know what I'm talking about. It's a different feeling. But when you have to go, and you probably don't even have a hesitation too much, unless you know the person has a temper problem, whatever, but usually you don't have a hesitation problem to go to somebody and say, look, I feel bad, something broke, something didn't work, something went wrong, but I tried to do it the way you said, and it just, maybe I missed something, whatever, I just want to let you know what I did so you can help me, right? As opposed to, I don't want to talk to them because they're going to realize when I talk to them that I did it my way, which wasn't their way, and then it blew up in my face. And then it went bad. And now I have to own when they say to me, well, how come you didn't do it the way I told you to? Because I thought I was smarter than you? You're not going to say that. Because I was too lazy, because it was more work, we have a million excuses and reasons why we do it. All you're going to want is the conversation end and crawl into a box because you just are not wanting to be in that embarrassing, shameful moment because you know you did it. And you got to own that. But you don't want to own that. So what do? You'll blame everything but owning it. You'll make every excuse. You'll even especially blame the person that gave, well, you didn't tell me that, or you didn't tell me this, and blah, 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 blah. You just make all these excuses. Meanwhile, the person knows full well they did tell you. Then you argue over whether or not they told you. Husbands, wives, you know what I'm talking about? You're not even arguing about what happened. You're arguing about whether or not the person said anything. Well, I told you. No, you didn't. Yes, you did. There's all this screaming. That's why we should, all of us need body cams, like the police. Especially when husbands and wives are interacting, have a body cam, because you'll need to go back to the videotape to find out what everybody actually did say. I'm not kidding. Every one of you who's married knows you've said or thought in your head, man, I need to carry a recorder around. You either said it out loud to your spouse or just thought that thought. Because somehow, when it gets heated, the memory of what happened doesn't match. And by the way, half the time it's probably you and not them. Doesn't matter. The memory doesn't match. Right? Because when we get emotional, you know what emotions do? By the way, mark this down. It has nothing to do with this teaching necessarily. Well, maybe to some degree, because it puts you in a certain level of darkness. When you are in a negative emotion, or even a positive emotion, but really when you're in a strong negative emotion, there's a black hole warping of time. And you will not remember things accurately and correctly as they happened in the right order. I'm just telling you, this is like a weird physics fact. When you are in a strong, upset, negative emotion, it will literally warp in your mind how the events actually happened. You will not remember them correctly, and you will not remember them in the correct order. Some of it will be switched around and messed up. That's how strong emotions can mess with your head. You literally will become incapable of correctly remembering what happened in the right order. And then you fight over it because you're both having those negative emotions, and you're both angry, and you're both in strong places. And so neither one of you actually remembers it correctly, not fully, because you can't. The emotions are making that impossible. Because part of that strong emotion is, in your head, you're right and everything's their fault. So therefore, the memory has to back that up. So you can't remember your part. That's where your ownership can't even work, because in your head, you didn't do anything. It was all them. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to a couple where they tell me about the blow up. I said, but what happened before that? And it's almost like whoever got all mad can't remember. Well, I shouldn't say whoever got mad. The husband or the wife is now exploded, was triggered by something. The person who triggered can't remember anything about triggering. They just remember the explosion. Well, for no reason, he just started screaming at me. For no reason, she threw something at me. What do you mean for no reason? What happened before that? There had to be a reason. I don't mean it was a good one. I'm not saying there's a valid one, but something happened. I mean, did he just or she just come home and just for some reason just spontaneously combust? But some of you think that's what it is when you fight. Because you don't have the right context. You don't understand these things. And so that's what we're talking about in here. Okay, if you're going to be in a place where you're not put to shame, you have to be an unadulterated, milk-drinking, newborn babe who has put everything aside, who is becoming like the living cornerstone that they laid in Zion, a chief cornerstone, chosen, precious, that he who believes. Go back to the teachings where we talk about what belief is and how that is, and we did that in the Are You Saved teaching. I'm sure I covered it in the Do You Believe teaching, but that was a long time ago. All right? So we need to redo that one probably. But belief is an action. It's not an intellectual, emotional, or spiritual concept. It's an action. If I tell you that something is hot, don't touch it. If you believe me, you don't touch it. But you could tell me you believe me and still touch it. Then did you really believe me? No. Because maybe you didn't believe the part. Actually, let me rephrase that. I say, it's hot, don't touch it, you will burn yourself. And you're thinking, oh no, I can handle that. This happens a lot with adults when things come out of the oven and they're grabbing trays and things. They're like, oh no, it's not that bad. I can handle it. I can hold it. And by the way, I know people that over years of working in like baking and cooking can do and handle a lot more heat than some of the rest of us. But there are those of you that think you can more than you can. And the person says, be careful, you're going to burn yourself. And then guess what? You burn yourself. Now, did you believe the person? No. Because in your head, you're like, no, I won't burn myself. Okay, but you believed them when they said it was hot. People believe Messiah is Messiah, but then they don't act like they believe it. Okay? Your actions, as James will teach us, right, in James chapter 2, demonstrate in the three-dimensional world your belief. If you believe, you take an action. So it says, those who believe in him, on him, whatever that's like a weird sort of word, on him. I don't know what that even means, believe on him. But those who believe in Messiah won't be put to shame because they're going to walk and act and do things in accordance with the actions that prove that you're drinking unadulterated milk, that you have put aside all that other junk, and that you are doing like the living stone that you're supposed to be growing into. As you transform from what you are into what he is. Amen? Okay? That's the challenge here. So, but they just want to read verse 6 and say, look, he who believes on him shall by no means be put to shame. Well, not unless you do something that puts you to shame. But the assumption is that if you believe, you won't do it. You won't do the things that bring shame. If he says, as the spirit of, we were called according to, set apart by the Spirit unto obedience. So he says in Exodus 19, if you do what I say, I'll take you as my people and all this other blessing will come, etc. So when he says, don't eat A, B, C, D, or whatever, if you believe that he is creator, then you're not going to eat that. Not just do you believe that it's not, because some people say, well, I know it was bad for people back and blah, 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 but they do things differently today and it's blah, blah, blah. No, don't argue whether or not it's applicable to now because you think, he said it, that's it. Because you believe in his authority. You believe that he has the authority to tell you, don't do that. Do this. Don't do that. Do this. Either you believe that or not. And how is it shown? By your obedience, by your actions. But we were called on to obedience. That's the covenant. That's the contract. Okay? They knew and experienced and believed that Elohim existed. They heard his voice at Mount Sinai. But then did their behavior exemplify their belief? No. They were laid low in the desert because of their lack of belief. Not belief in his existence, just in their belief that they needed to actually listen. You see? So, well, I'm a Christian and I believe on the Messiah and I believe on him, so therefore I can't be put to shame. Well, it all depends on what you do. If you're doing things that are shameful, you're going to be put to shame. Believing in him isn't going to change any of that. Now, it may change what you understand brings shame. If you understand the Torah and don't keep it, that brings shame. When you don't understand the Torah, that's not necessarily shameful. You don't know what you don't know. But you are responsible for what you do know. And everybody that's keeping the 9 commandments, I meant 10, of course, but 9 being, because we won't argue about the 4th one in Shabbat. They know it's shameful to commit adultery. They know it's shameful to murder. They know it's shameful to steal. They know it's shameful. I mean, you know what I'm saying? But yet, oh no, I can't be put to shame. I believe in Messiah. That's ridiculous. And nothing I read says that unless you'd read that verse completely without any context. This context is verse 6 comes after telling you that this is to those set apart by the Spirit unto obedience, those that have put aside then all the evil, etc. This is those who are newborn babes drinking and desiring the unadulterated milk and are growing by it. This is talking about very specific people who have drawn near to him. That's what it's talking about. You need context. So now they want to jump down and he says, look, this preciousness, verse 7, then is for you who believe. See, I believe, so it's all for me. But listen, the rest of the verse. But to those who are, oh, wait a minute. There's a problem here. Houston, we have a problem. But to those who are disobedient. Oops. Uh-oh. Somebody just put obedience into this mix again. The preciousness then is to those who believe. And because it says that there's a contrast to those who are disobedient, then that means that those who believe must be those who are obedient. He's contrasting two things. Now, he didn't say to those who believe, A, and to those who don't believe, B. He purposely used a different word so that you were getting more full context and the thoroughness of the point. To those who believe, which also means obedience, and then to those who are disobedient, but that also means those who don't believe. This way he said both things without having to say that much. He was much more efficient in his words. But he said both things. Those who believe and are obedient, this preciousness is for them. But those who are disobedient and don't believe, because their actions demonstrate that they don't believe, the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. Okay? He says, and a stone of stumbling and a rock that makes for falling, who stumble because they are disobedient to the Torah, to the word, to Yeshua, to the light, to the truth, to which they also were appointed. If, let's just use this in hopefully modern ways of looking at things. If I appoint you to something, what have I done? I've given you a position, and that position has an expectation of performance of something, some sort of duties or authority or something, right? If I appoint you something, there's an expectation that you have some sort of duties or responsibilities, etc. I mean, I'm not giving you a gold watch saying you're retired, go enjoy life. I'm appointing you to a position. That's an appointment. So I now have an expectation that you will take fiduciary responsibility over something. You have a task or people or something that you are now responsible for. Well, you were appointed to be obedient to the word. That is your task. And we call you, verse 9, a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a set-apart nation, a people for a possession, if you are appointed to that and you actually accept your appointment and maintain the tasks that are part of the expectation of your job, of your appointment. See, what people want to read verse 6, about not being put to shame, and then they want to jump down to verse 9. But I'm a chosen race, a royal priesthood, and they get all full of themselves, and hey. A set-apart nation, a people for a possession, that you should proclaim the praises of him who called you, here we go, out of darkness, which is all that thinking that had them all screwed up, into his marvelous light. Now we're going to go back to what is darkness and light talking about? Right authority here. You were set apart by the set-apart spirit unto obedience. You were to lay aside all the other junk that you came to learn through the set-apart spirit was junk and needed to be laid aside. It was evil. It was wrong. It was not productively effective in getting you to become like the living stone. So, again, this preciousness, the being told that you will by no means be put to shame, is for the obedient. Oh no, I'm going to be all over the internet again. Oh, he's talking about works again. Salvation by works. Of course, this has nothing to do with salvation. This is all about the reward. Remember that. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and listen to Are You Saved a couple of dozen times so you get it. Okay? This preciousness, he says, because those who are disobedient, this rock is a stumbling. It causes, you trip over it. It's a rock that makes for falling, to stumble because of disobedience to the word. The word to which they were appointed. Go back to, listen to the language here. Chosen race, royal priesthood, set-apart nation, people for a possession. That is Exodus 19 right there. If you will obey my voice, I will accept you as my people. You will be a chosen race, a chosen nation. You will be set apart. You will be held up and accepted and proclaimed to be a people for a possession. How many verses are there in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament, where it says how he, when has it ever happened before? Actually, the New Testament talks about, when has it ever happened before that a creator or God of any sort that was called, of any kind of Elohim, has taken a people for himself out of another place? We find this in the Tanakh. We find it quoted in the Brit, right? When have you ever seen that happen? Never. Just once. It's never before. Never since. So that language is the same language that you see Peter talking about here. He says, if you're doing all this stuff, this all goes back to Exodus 19. This all goes back to the beginning. And by the way, in case you're wondering who the audience is, he called them the strangers of the dispersion. So who's that? The lost tribes. He's not even talking to Gentiles here. The strangers of dispersion. The diaspora, the dispersion, scripturally is always talking about the northern kingdom being scattered. Okay? As well as those in the southern kingdom that got scattered as well at times. And will happen again a few years from this little letter here when they have the fall of the temple in Jerusalem in 70. And there'll be more scattering. But he's writing his letter to those that have been dispersed. This is important. The strangers of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, etc., according to the foreknowledge. Now, the word chosen isn't in there. That was added. That's in italics. These people have been dispersed according to the foreknowledge of Elohim. He knew he sent them out there. He dispersed them. He knew who they were. This letter is to them. Not that Peter knows exactly who is by name. The letter would go out, and those that are a part of this would know. Oh, wow, this is for me. I'm him. I'm that person. It's talking to me. But notice that what it's talking about is if you don't understand what's been going on here all so far in chapter 2, that you're supposed to be a chosen race, royal priesthood, blah, 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 he says, this is because you have been, up to this point, as part of the foreknowledge of Yah, in the dispersion you have been in darkness. What is darkness? A place where you're waiting for something to be birthed out of. A place where something has been hidden for later revealing. A place devoid of actively useful light. A barrier to keep something in or out. So they were put there to keep them out for a little while. They were dispersed. They were punished. But Yahweh says, where I've sent them, I will regather them. And when he regathers them, what's he doing? Taking them out of darkness and bringing them into light. And so they're coming from no authority or wrong authority into correct authority. That's what this is all about right here. And we're barely scratching the surface of this chapter. How far am I going to go here? I'm only trying to get to verse 12. We're almost there. Now, so in verse 9, now he's referring in verse 9 to Exodus 19. But look what happens now in verse 10. Now he's referring to Hosea chapter 2. He says, after he says he called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, who were not a people, but now the people of Elohim, who had not obtained compassion, but now obtained compassion. See, you could read that as a Gentile coming to belief in Messiah and have no idea that that has anything to do with prophecy, has anything to do with the dispersed Israelites. So in case you're thinking, Rabbi, you're just off on a limb here, he's talking to everybody. It's not just Northern Kingdom. It's not the lost tribes. It's not any of that stuff. Well, really? Okay, what did he just say? Who were once not a people, but now the people of Elohim, who had not obtained compassion, but now obtained compassion. So let's go to Hosea. Okay, we'll go to Hosea. Hosea, Joel, Amos, so in case you want to know where it is. Okay. Hosea chapter 2. Actually, let's look at chapter 1 just for a second. Hosea chapter 1. In the beginning, as he's talking to Hosea in verse 2, he says, the beginning of the word of Yahweh, which Yahweh said to Hosea, go take yourself a woman of whoring and children of whoring, for the land utterly whored away from Yahweh. So he's saying, look, just for context, I want you to understand the metaphor of what it feels like to be me. Go take a woman who's a whore, because my people who I'm married to, in a sense, are acting like whores. They're whoring all over the place. And because of that whoring, okay, she conceives in verse 6, and bears a daughter, and he said to her, call her Lo Ruchama, for no longer do I have compassion on, the house of Israel, the northern kingdom, so as to forgive them at all. Wow. No compassion, no mercy, Lo Ruchama. He says, but I shall have compassion on the house of Judah at this point. And then look at verse 9. She conceives in verse 8 again. In verse 9 it says, and call this one lo ami, not my people. For you are not my people, and I am not for you. Wow. He says, yet, even though I just called them no compassion and not a people, yet the number, verse 10, of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which is not measured nor counted. And it shall be in the same place where it was said to them, you are not my people. They shall be called, you are the sons of the living El. Go to chapter 2 and verse 23. Actually, we go to verse 21. It says, and in that day, it shall be in that day that I answer. So we're talking about in that day, in the future, where they are no longer going to be, verse 16, call me my husband and no longer call me my Baal, and I'll remove the names of the Baals from their mouths, etc. And in that day I shall make a covenant with them, etc. So we're talking about a future. And I shall take you as a bride, verse 19, unto myself forever, and take you as a bride unto me in righteousness. I'll take you, verse 20, unto a bride unto me in trustworthiness. And verse 23, and I shall sow her for myself in the earth, and I shall have compassion on her who had not obtained compassion. And I shall say to those who were not my people, you are my people, while they say, my Elohim. Isn't that the same thing as Exodus 19, though? It said, you will be my people. And actually, we find this later on in Deuteronomy when they're about to cross the Jordan, where it says, you have come today and caused Yahweh to call you and declare you to be his people, and you have been caused to declare that he is your Elohim. So we see that happening and playing out exactly as he says right here. Okay? I'll give you the Deuteronomy reference if I can find it real quick. In verse 20, okay, chapter 26, it's helpful if you know what part of the page is on. Chapter 26, 17, you have today caused Yahweh to proclaim to be your Elohim and to walk in his ways, guard his laws, and commands his right rulings, to obey his voice. And Yahweh's caused you to proclaim today to be his people. By proclaiming to be his people, you're not saying, you're saying, he is my Elohim. I am his people. And he's declared that you are his people. So this is all playing out exactly that way. And so is that not exactly the same words as verse 10 in chapter 2 of Peter? So we can't be confused of what he's talking about. He's not talking to Gentiles. He's talking about what Hosea said. What Yahweh said through Hosea. He said, hey, no more, lo ruchama, no mercy, no compassion. Lo ami, not my people. And then here he says, who once were not a people. Oh, those guys. The guys in chapter 1 when he says, you guys who are in the dispersion. The Israelites. But now the people of Elohim, who had not obtained compassion, but now obtained. By the way, you want to know what the good news is? This is a huge piece of the good news. It's not just, hey, by the way, we now know there's a Messiah who died and was buried and was resurrected, etc. for you. That is good news, but this is what they were looking forward to, the good news they were waiting for. Though the good news that we are no longer going to be looked at as lo ruchama, lo ami. We were in darkness. Okay, we were punished. We were sent to our rooms, so to speak. We were put into darkness, and now we're told you can come out now. You're no longer in the prison. Prisons were always pictured, especially back then, as darkness. You are now being set free out of the prisons, out of the darkness. You know, when it says that Yeshua went to those in prison, he wasn't talking about like literal prisons. Talking about this. Oh, he went to those in the grave. Well, this is like being in the grave. You might as well be dead. You're dead. You know, you see people talk about, especially in the Jewish community, if you go back far enough, you are dead to me. Okay? People would say that to their children and family members who would do something, you are like dead to me. They would tear their clothes or whatever, ashes and the whole thing. So when it talks about the grave and it talks about the jails, it's talking about this. But your church never told you that. Because they didn't know how to connect Hosea to what Peter's talking about. They didn't understand that people who were called lo ruchama, lo ami, were called that because of disobedience to the covenant. So now we don't have to keep the covenant? Now we don't have to obey Yahweh? And this is going to get us to be called a royal priesthood, a chosen people. Really? Now, I'm not trying to pick on you, because if you were never shown the connections, how could you know? This is why Paul and others say you can only know these things if the anointed teachers and people that have been put in a place to make those connections for you are there. You're not expected to piece this together yourself, which is a good thing, because it would take a lot of hours of your time that you need to be doing other things than doing that. So he gives you one person who spends their whole time doing these things so that they can share these things with you. And he sends the fivefold guys, the prophets and teachers, specifically of the five, to help you to understand what all this that's written for you is talking about. Because he says, you are a chosen race. Who? The Gentiles reading this thinking it's talking about them? No. The ones who were once not a people, but now are, but the Gentiles weren't a people. But he's directly quoting Hosea. It's nothing to do with Gentiles. Now, as he's doing this and the Gentiles get to hear, they get to come too. And they get treated as just as equal as these ones. There is no hierarchy. There's no caste system here. There's no class warfare. Once you make the decision, you are what you are. Forget about your bloodline. It doesn't matter. Go to the Discovering Your Identity teachings and understand this. But in doing so, you're coming out of darkness into light. By the way, even if you were a Gentile, you could use what Peter says in Ephesians. We always go back to Ephesians chapter 2, when he talks about how you were once Gentiles in the flesh. You were without Messiah. This is chapter 2, verse 11 and 12. You were excluded from citizenship of Israel, strangers from the covenants, with no expectation, without Elohim. He says, but now in Messiah, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood, and the barrier is broken. So he's saying the Gentiles who were and the Israelites who were, there's no more barrier between them. Everybody gets to now come. So Paul's saying the same thing in Ephesians 2. Back to Peter, right? 1 Peter. He says, beloved ones, I appeal to you as sojourners and pilgrims to abstain from fleshly lusts which battle against the life, having your behavior among the Gentiles good, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, let them, by observing your good works, esteem Elohim in the day of visitation. So first of all, again, when he says your behavior among the Gentiles, meaning if you're reading this and you know this applies to you, you're not a Gentile, either because you never were or because you've changed. If you're now Israel by decision or Israel by birth, you're not a Gentile. Doesn't matter which way you got to be Israel. But notice what he says, beloved ones, I appeal to you to abstain from those desires, those cravings that don't lead you to life, that are going to bring shame. See, we think of fleshly lust. What do we always think about? It's got to be something sexually perverse, because the word lust somehow always is about sex. You lust after power. You lust after control. You lust after pleasure of any sort. You lust after food. It doesn't matter. You lust after whatever you crave. I want it. That's called a lust. But the word lust somehow always gets linked to some perverted sexual thing. Now, that doesn't mean that that's not lust. But don't miss the point, because that's the only connection. So you're going to say, well, I don't have that, so you ignore it. Whatever you strongly crave and desire that is hampering your ability to go and win the battle against life. So that, remember, it's a battle against life. You need to die. He's trying to kill the you, so that he can live in you. But you don't want to die. That part of you has a lot of willpower, very strong-willed. And it doesn't want to die. But yet he says, look, you have to, I appeal to you, abstain from the fleshly lusts which battle against life. Okay, what's life? The truth, the Torah, etc. But these things battle against it. They battle against the true things that are, it says, I am the life, right? I am the way, the truth, and the life. But you've got this other life in you that's warring. You know, Paul talks about that law in his members that wars against the law of sin and death. The law of sin and death isn't Torah. The law of sin and death is your thinking what's right and wrong, your way of doing it. That's sin and death. There's a way that seems right to a man, and the way leads to death, destruction. It's bad, doesn't work. It's not even a man to even know how to put his feet. You believe your book, you don't believe your book. I mean, that's really the problem here, isn't it? He says, look, you have to be careful because your behavior among the Gentiles is being observed, and they're going to speak against you, especially if they observe you doing things you shouldn't do. You got to be careful because now you're bringing shame to the name. When we talk about it's what you do that brings shame to the name, breaks the third commandment. It's your actions that can break the third commandment. It's not how you pronounce the name. You want to worry about the third commandment? Worry about your claim to be a child of the living Elohim and then acting the fool, acting the Gentile. Don't claim to be of the chosen nation, the set-apart people, a royal priesthood, and then act stupid and embarrass your heavenly Father whose name you claim. You weren't chosen to do it. You were appointed unto obedience. You accept that or you don't. It has to do with your appointment. So what are you going to do with that? Let's go before the Father. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. Father, we come before you, and we really want to appreciate your drawing us and calling us out of darkness. And I really appreciate that the light you draw us into is marvelous. Sometimes I don't think we appreciate how marvelous, incredible, amazing, and whatever other, huge expletive we could use to describe how just indescribably good and fabulous, and whatever words we could, we don't appreciate it enough. You appointed us onto obedience. You appointed us onto obedience specifically to the word. We are covenanted to obey your voice. We understand Yeshua is your voice. We appreciate that we were once not a people, but now we can obtain compassion and mercy and be the children of the living Elohim. But Father, we have all kinds of evil, deceit, hypocrisies, envyings, etc. We didn't even talk about breaking down all those problems, all the envyings and hypocrisies specifically, and deceit and stuff that we rational lie all the time. That's deceit, as we rational lie to ourselves. So Father, we struggle. Help us to be newborn babes, to literally put everything down and only want to be fed and nurtured and grow on the unadulterated word, the unadulterated milk of the word coming from Messiah, coming from you, the Father, because we have tasted that the Master is good. So, Father, we want to thank you. We ask for your patience and your mercy as we go forward, but that you continuously give us a little bit of a kick every now and then, too, to keep us moving forward so that we can appreciate the spark that you give us to remind us that there is an end to all this that we're all trying to get to, and that end being to transform into the image of Yeshua and be with you forever in the kingdom. So, Father, we want to thank you, praise you, and give you all glory and honor as we go through this process. In the name of Yeshua, our Messiah, amen, amen, amen.